So we just got a massive reveal of new content coming to World of Warcraft, all being revolved around the 20th anniversary. So I want to go over all of that information because there is a ridiculous amount of things coming. Now, I think it's important to understand that the 20th anniversary isn't just some event that's going to happen for a few weeks. There's so much content coming with the 20th anniversary that it is going to be patch 11.0.5. This is going to be our first content patch of the expansion, and it's seeming like this may be one of the biggest 0.5 patches we've ever gotten. So while a good chunk of the content we're going to go over is going to be going away at some point, it'll be around for over 2 months, so you won't have to feel like you're in a rush to get everything you want out of this anniversary event. Now, one of the things I'm most excited for in this event is a new raid, and it's actually pretty crazy we're getting a new raid in a 0.5 patch, but we're going to be revisiting Blackrock Depths as a 10 to 15 player raid that will consist of 8 main bosses and 5 mini bosses, and it will have LFR, normal, and heroic difficulty. So while it won't have a mythic difficulty, it will still have heroic difficulty, so presumably we'll also be getting some pretty good gear from this because we'll already be in season 1 of the War Within. The mythic raid will already have been completed. A lot of people will have a very high gear, so presumably this is going to give some pretty good gear. I'm also very interested to see on what gear we're going to actually be getting from this. Is it only going to be Blackrock Depths gear, like upscaled and changed slightly for the War Within, or are they going to be adding some new stuff as well? Because a lot of the bosses they showed off are completely remade. Like, you're not going to be facing the same bosses from the dungeons. These are going to be reminiscent of those bosses, but they're going to have new mechanics. A lot of them are going to have new models because it also looks like Ragnaros is actually one of the bosses in this raid. So there's definitely going to be some pretty interesting bosses in here. And the second of the main pieces of content coming with this event is a new world event where we'll be revisiting the opening of the gates of Ahn'Qiraj, but this one is going to be quite a bit different. It's going to involve chromie and time's going to get a bit messed up. So we're not only going to be seeing the enemies you would normally see, you're also going to be seeing Scourge enemies, Legion enemies, and we're going to be seeing bosses like Ahn'Qiraj and Kel'Thuzad. So this seems like a pretty big event, and it does seem that you actually queue into this, and they actually described it as a 10 to 15 player scenario. So it seems like instead of going to that zone, you just queue into this, and then the event is going to take place in an instance version of the entirety of the zone, but there'll be a lot of players, and it seems pretty interesting. And I'm also wondering what rewards are going to come from this as well, because presumably this is also going to reward some type of at least catch-up gear. Now, with this update, we are getting some permanent additions to the game. One of the bigger ones being an update to timewalking. And more specifically, we are getting timewalking classic dungeons. And we're going to be getting Deadmines, Zul'Farrak, 2 Dire Maul wings, and 2 Stratholme wings. And alongside of that, they're also going to be refreshing all of the timewalking vendors. So if you've done any timewalking in basically the history of the system, all of the vendors have remained pretty much the exact same. The same gear, the same cosmetics, the same mounts, the same pets, all the same stuff. And it seems like they're fully refreshing all of that. And one of the really interesting things they said is that you'll be able to get some transmog pieces that may have been unobtainable. Now, I know some people have been theorizing that we may be able to get some transmog of some very rare items from the past, like maybe a corrupted Ashbringer. I'm not sure if they'll go that far, but it is quite interesting that they'll be basically re-adding some unobtainable transmogs into the time walking system. They're also going to be making it so anytime a time walking event comes around, any characters of level 10 will be able to take part in it and queue for the dungeons now, which will actually make leveling substantially faster during these events, because usually you have to be some certain level to do time walking, whichever time walking event it is, and time walking events are usually the fastest leveling, just spam running those dungeons. So being able to do it from level 10 will actually actually make leveling characters when these come around extremely fast. And we do also have some semi-permanent updates to the anniversary events. So normally we have all the different festivities that happen in the Caverns of Time, and then you also have the old world bosses spawning, and then you also have the Korok's Revenge PvP event. All of those are usually part of every anniversary, but these are all being changed quite a bit. And to start off with the biggest change, all of those small festivities that are usually in the Caverns of Time have now been brought out to the front of the Caverns of Time and have been pretty much completely redone with a ton of new small activities to do. So you'll have a new Fashion Frenzy event, which is basically a mini trial of style. We have a Mount Mania event, which will basically be a mount off. It seems like an NPC will get on a random mount, and everyone playing the game will have to get on that mount as well if they don't have that mount. Then you'll have the Pet Corner, which is a place you'll be able to transform into your battle pets. So it just seems to be a small transform activity. Then there will be the Guest Relations event that they described as a sequel to the Secrets of Azeroth. So basically a small secret hunt. And then there will also be some other small things here. Like you'll be able to kind of cosplay as different NPCs. So you could be Illidan, or you could be Khadgar, or any number of other NPCs. And it seems like you'll be able to use their different voice lines in some way. And I'm actually pretty curious on what you're going to be getting for doing any of these small events. There is going to be a new currency for the 20th anniversary, so maybe you'll just get some of that, or maybe there'll be other rewards. Because even though the developers went over a bunch of the rewards of this event, I think there's going to actually be a lot more. And then on top of all of this, all of those old world bosses will still be spawning. So that will include the Doomwalker, Azragos, Lord Kazak, the Dragons of Nightmare, along with two new additions that will both be spawning in Tenaris, which is the Shaw of Anger, and Archivon, the Stone Watcher. And if you haven't killed any of these world bosses in other anniversary events, they do usually give some decent gear. It's usually a bit better than like catch-up gear for a patch would be, but it's usually not like super high-end gear, but some of these specific items that have pretty good procs can actually be quite good. And you're also able to go kill all of these world bosses and get loot from them on a daily basis. And I would not be surprised if the drops from these world bosses and maybe even other parts of this event are actually warbound until equipped. So you'll be able to go farm them on every character and then potentially trade them between all of your characters. And that brings us to a very important part of this event, the loot. And starting off, we have something that's going to be included in the November trading post, which are back pieces inspired by the Warcraft RTS games. So you have one for Orc, Human, Night Elf, and Scourge. And those will be in the November trading post, but you won't have to buy them. That will just be the reward for completing that month's trading post. Now, when looking at a majority of the other rewards, and more specifically the other cosmetic rewards, there's going to be a new currency that's going to allow you to buy basically all of the cosmetics from this 20th anniversary. And these are called Bronze Celebration tokens. And you'll be able to earn these through a bunch of different daily and weekly quests specific to the 20th anniversary. But you'll also be able to get these tokens just from doing the War Within Season 1 objectives. They specifically mentioned like weekly quests, but presumably you'll also be getting them from just doing any Season 1 content. So maybe from completing like a Mythic Plus dungeon, you'd get some currency. Maybe killing like a raid boss, you would also get some currency. And I would probably expect that doing the Blackrock Depths raid will probably give you a bunch of this currency as well. And this currency is what is going to be used to buy most of the other cosmetics we are going over. Now, starting off, we have the new main mount for this event, which is going to be the Cold Flame Tempest mount, which is basically going to be a Cold Phoenix that's armored up. And how they actually went about designing this mount is that Blizzard employees that are at Blizzard for a certain amount of time, it's either 10 or 20 years, get a physical sword and shield in real life. And those real life service items they get for working at Blizzard for a certain amount of time is how they went about designing the armor on this mount. But then they also thought those service rewards in real life were really cool. So they also designed those and put those in the game as well, which is going to be a sword, a shield, and a crown. There's also going to be a toy that allows you to put on a ring. That's also something employees get as a service award. And in a similar vein to those cosmetics, there's also going to be a bunch of other previous anniversary rewards you're going to be able to obtain in this anniversary as well. There's going to be some new stuff as well. So there's going to be a 20-year balloon toy and then 2 new pets, which are baby the Dreadlords, so Little Kaz and Little Doomy. And then with the new currency, you'll be able to purchase some old rewards. So the Corehound Chain, which is the Corehound mount, Little Nefarian, so a pet, a Molten Corgi as another pet, and a Nixian Whelpling as another pet, Hate Spark the Tiny as another pet, and the Baby Lizard Bear as another pet, which is actually a really old one. And it did also look like from the vendors that there's probably going to be a lot of additional stuff. This is just some of the things that they specifically described. And last but not least, we have what's probably the most hyped part of this anniversary, and that is the remaking of all of the tier 2 armor sets. And they haven't just upscaled these armors, they've actually remade them. So not only are they going to be of the graphical quality of armor sets in the War Within, but they've also added a lot more 3D effects. And that basically just means making the armor actual 3D objects like they do for most new armor sets now. Because if you go back to a lot of old armor, say from Classic, most of the armor is just like painted onto your character when you equip it, instead of being like actual 3D objects with like moving cloth or moving chains. So they're not only just going to be of a much higher graphical quality, but they're also going to have those 3D items on them. So all of the classes that existed in Classic are getting their old tier 2 sets remade, but some of the classes didn't exist. And for those, they're making new sets kind of inspired of events back then, if they could do it. Like for the Evoker, it was inspired from old dragons. The Death Knight is kind of reminiscent of Arthas. And then something like the Monk, they just made one of the coolest looking sets I think they have ever made. And something that's really interesting is in all of the screenshots they showed of these, they were all the normal colors and they didn't mention any recolors. But in the video going over all of this, they showed the Monk set being green, and then when they initially published an article to go over all this information, the Monk set was yellow. They have since updated the article, so the Monk set in the article is also green, but that does show that they had a yellow set of this Monk set. So either there's going to be recolors in this event, this kind of going to be a surprise, or what's also kind of likely is that they are going to have recolors of all of these sets, and they're probably going to be in like the trading post or something somewhere down the road. But all of these sets are looking pretty incredible. I'm actually surprised at how well these old sets translated into the much higher graphical quality with all of the more 3D effects. And I think they did a really good job of making these sets modern, but they're still very clearly the tier 2 sets. They didn't change a bunch of stuff. They basically just upgraded them as best they could while still keeping them as the exact same sets. And they do look incredible. So as mentioned, this is the 11.0.5 patch, so there is some more permanent additions, starting off with new classes being able to play as Drakthir, and this includes Hunters, Rogues, Priests, Mages, Warriors, and Warlocks. So all of those classes will be able to play as the Drakthir race, and it has also been confirmed that you will be able to permanently stay in your Visage form if you want to, so you won't have to be in Dragon form. So you'll just be able to basically toggle if you want to be in your Visage form or if you just want to stay in your Dragon form. And it is also interesting to note that their racial abilities have been nerfed for all of the other classes outside of the Evoker. So if you're not playing an Evoker, your Tail Swipe will be a 3-minute cooldown and your Wing Buffet will be a 3-minute cooldown as well. But even though they're 3-minute cooldowns, having 2 AoE stops on any of these classes is pretty ridiculous. So I'm wondering if this is going to get further nerfed or changed in the future. And even more specifically, I think we're going to see a lot of more high-end Mythic Plus players switching over to be a Drakthir. And then the final permanent addition coming with this patch, we have some new Ascendant forms for Shamans. And if you don't play Shaman, Ascendance is one of the big cooldowns. Every spec can turn into this either through a long cooldown, or all of the specs also have a passive talent that using one of your main abilities can randomly transform you into Ascendance. And the old Ascendance form was actually a model created in Cataclysm, so it was very old. And the new one has been met with some mixed reception exceptions because it is quite different than what you normally would expect. The body kind of seems like it ascended, but once you get to the face, it almost looks like the mask of like a banshee or something with this like big blown out hair in the back that's color dependent on what spec you're in when using this ascendant form. And I was a bit apprehensive on it when I first saw it, but the more I see it, the more I actually like it. And these also do kind of look a bit creepy, which even though it's like an elemental transformation, I do think it being creepy is actually making me like it more. But that's pretty much all of the content we got revealed for the 20th anniversary and patch 11.0.5. But that's all I want to go over, so thanks for watching.